Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The sunset bathed the rolling hills of rural Nebraska in golden light, where autumn always carried the sweetness of ripe apples and the rustle of falling leaves in the breeze. Ethan Carter, a graying man with calloused hands, stood hunched beneath the awning of his small-town repair shop. Under the warm glow of the workbench light, he tightened bolts on an old harvester like it was a precious relic. Ethan's life had long since narrowed. His work, the repair shop, and his daughter Lily. Now a senior in agricultural studies at Iowa State. His wife, Ellie, passed from cancer when Lily was just 7. Since then, Ethan had been both father and mother. He no longer hoped for love or reconnections from the past, until that fateful afternoon. A silver SUV pulled up in front of the shop. A woman stepped out, her blonde hair tied neatly, eyes sharp but softened by something familiar. Ethan looked up, his heart skipping. "Isabel," he stammered, the wrench slipping from his hand. "Hi, Ethan," she smiled. And that smile carried a world long gone. "I need help with the irrigation system at the farm." "They say you're the best around," he wanted to ask. "Why are you here?" But instead he just nodded. Of course, Isabel Lancaster, the girl who left with a full scholarship, the one who once said, "I don't belong here," was back, running a high-tech agricultural project called Lancaster Fields. And yet, he couldn't deny it. 15 years later, a single glance brought it all rushing back. The Lancaster farm sat deep in the valley, on land that once belonged to Isabel's father, Frank, the quiet, kind farmer. Ethan had worked summer jobs there just for the chance to see her. "I kept the old house," Isabel said as they walked through the apple orchard. "Even though the farm's all tech now, I couldn't bring myself to change it." Ethan smiled softly, his eyes drifting toward the little balcony, where they had once sat listening to the radio on summer nights, sharing soda and dreams. Everything between them now felt both familiar and foreign. As Ethan worked on the sensor system, Isabel sat on the porch steps watching quietly. He was still methodical, still patient, still didn't say much. But when the first spray of water burst from the pipes, Isabel stood and clapped lightly. "You still make the impossible look easy," she said. "Just like when you fixed my dad's old pocket watch." Ethan chuckled. "The first time all afternoon. That thing was beyond saving. But Frank wouldn't let it go." "Because he believed in you," Isabel replied gently. "And I did too." The words made Ethan pause. The breeze carried the scent of ripe apples and a forgotten feeling he couldn't name. The next day, Isabel brought a worn wooden box to the shop. "I found this in Dad's old storage," she said. "It's his farm journal, but some entries are more personal." Ethan opened it. On the yellowed pages were neat notes of writing. "Ethan may not say much, but I'd trust Isabel with that boy. He understands the land, and more importantly, he keeps his word." He looked up, speechless. Isabel held his gaze. "I thought if I came back, it would be like solving an equation. But I've learned that some things take longer than a season to grow." Ethan closed the book slowly. "I was angry with you for a long time. For leaving. For not saying goodbye. I wrote to you," Isabel said, voice trembling. "But your mother never gave you the letter." A heavy silence followed. Ethan remembered his mother's quiet disapproval, her fear he'd give up the shop for a love she didn't trust. He nodded gently. "She passed last year. I don't blame you anymore." A week later, the phone rang just after midnight. "Ethan," Isabel's voice shook with panic. "The storm's moving in fast. The harvester's down in the heritage wheat field. If we don't act now, we lose the entire experimental crop." Ethan didn't hesitate. He raced through the night. Floodlights glared across the field. Workers scrambled. The main machine sat lifeless in the rain. "The system's locked," her manager said. "Fail-safe triggered. Manual overrides not working." Ethan dove into the mud, flashlight in hand, his brain working faster than the wind. "Sensors think it's sinking. If I recalibrate the array, it'll reset." "Can you do it?" Isabel asked, soaked to the bone. "I'll drive it myself if I have to." 3 hours later, Ethan, muddy, drenched, hands shaking, steered the old harvester across the final stretch. As the wheat poured into the silos, Isabel ran to him and threw her arms around him in the rain. He whispered. "Maybe," Ethan said, "but I'd be crazier to let you lose everything again." 2 weeks later, Isabel walked into the workshop holding the same old pocket watch. This time, broken again. "It's not here to be fixed," she said. "It's here to stay." "With you?" Ethan looked at her, silent. "I'm staying," Isabel continued. "Not out of fear, not for convenience. I'm staying because I found something I thought I'd lost forever." Ethan placed the watch gently into a drawer, alongside other memories he never threw away. "Maybe this time," he said softly. "Time stopped at the right place. That winter, Lily came home from school. She was surprised to find Isabel in the shop, grease on her hands, smiling like she belonged. "She's smart," Isabel said, as the three sat by the fireplace. "Takes after her mom," Ethan smiled and took Isabel's hand. "She takes after her dad, too," Lily added, eyes sparkling. "The guy who always taught me, when something's broken, you fix it. And when the time's right, you start over." Outside, snow began to fall gently. In the little repair shop at the edge of town, the old pocket watch lay still in its drawer, its hands no longer ticking. But for the first time in 15 years, Ethan knew he didn't need it to measure time. Because the most important moments in life aren't counted in minutes or hours, but in the seconds you choose to hold on, the choices you make to start again, and the people you're lucky enough to find again. Just in time. The air in Maplewood had taken on that late autumn crispness, cool enough to wear jackets, but still holding onto the golden light that made the fields glow before dusk. Ethan Carter stood beneath the familiar walnut tree, outside his father's old shop, now fully his own, watching the long shadows stretch across the gravel drive. The place felt both unchanged and new, like the silence between two verses of a song long left unsung. It had been 3 months since Isabel Lancaster had walked back into his life. 3 months since the harvest that changed everything. He thought he'd made peace with her absence, with the way their lives had forked all those years ago. She to a future of innovation and influence. He to a quiet legacy of calloused hands and machines kept breathing. But time, he'd learned, doesn't heal all wounds. It just buries them deeper, until someone starts digging again. And Isabel had dug deep. Ethan hadn't expected her to return after the harvest gala, not after the board fallout, not after the headlines, but she had. With boots muddied from the fields, and a resolve he hadn't seen since they were both 19 and fearless, Isabel had come back with a proposal, not just for partnership in agriculture, but for something far harder, a second chance. Tonight, she was coming for dinner. Not just the two of them. Isabel would be bringing her father. Ethan hadn't seen Arthur Lancaster since the man had driven Isabel to the train station 15 years ago, and nodded curtly, never offering a handshake. Arthur had been a titan in the farming world, with ambition as wide as Nebraska's sky and no patience for distractions like young love. But things were different now. Arthur was older, weaker, and as Isabel confided, carrying the weight of regrets he'd never spoken aloud. Ethan wiped his hands on a towel and glanced at the roast warming in the oven. He'd triple-checked the recipe, even consulted one of his mother's old cookbooks. The pages yellowed and brittle like pressed leaves. The house smelled of rosemary, garlic, and nerves. When the knock came, he didn't move right away. He just stared at the door, heart thudding like the misfiring engine of a John Deere tractor. Then he opened it. Isabel stood there, her hair pulled back in a simple braid, eyes gentler than he remembered. Beside her was Arthur, older, yes, but still commanding in stature. He used a cane now, and his steps were careful, deliberate. But it was his eyes that caught Ethan's attention. Not the judgment of old, but something softer, tired. Wistful, maybe. "Mr. Lancaster," Ethan said. Arthur gave a small nod. "Ethan, may I come in?" As the three of them sat around the old wooden table, now polished and free of grease stains, Connors stiffly, like a tractor reluctant after a long winter. But as the meal wore on, something thawed. They spoke of the harvest, of soil techniques and market prices, of drought-resistant seeds, and the rising cost of sustainable tech. And then, as the plates were cleared, Arthur asked to see the orchard. Ethan hesitated. "It's not much, mostly wild now." "All the more reason," the old man said, his voice quiet but steady. The three walked down the gravel path behind the shop, past the old greenhouse and toward the orchard that Ethan's father had tended every season until his hands had finally refused to cooperate. The trees were mostly gnarled now, their leaves thinning, the apples stubborn and small, but the air smelled sweet with memory. Arthur stopped at the third tree, the one Ethan and Isabel had carved their initials into with a pocket knife the summer before she left. The marks were weathered now, nearly erased by time and bark. "You know," Arthur said slowly, "I thought I was doing the right thing, telling Isabel to go, to build something. I thought I was saving her from small dreams." Ethan said nothing. "But the truth is, I didn't trust her to know her own heart." "Or yours." Silence hung heavy. Isabel stepped forward. "Dad, no." Arthur held up a hand. "Let me say it. I can't go back, Ethan. But I see what you've built here, and I see the way she looks at this place. I was wrong. About a lot." The wind rustled the brittle leaves above them. Arthur turned to Ethan. "I may not be here much longer, but if she stays, if you both stay, build something here together, then maybe I didn't ruin everything." Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to say, "You don't get to come back and make it okay." But the truth was, he didn't want to carry bitterness anymore. Not when forgiveness could grow in its place. So he simply nodded. "We'll take care of it." All of it. That night, after Arthur had gone to rest in the guest room, Isabel and Ethan stood beneath the walnut tree, stars tangled in its branches. "You sure?" she asked. "About us? About this?" He turned to her, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Let's not call it us again," he said. "Let's call it you still," she smiled. "Still. Still." The weeks passed quietly but meaningfully. Isabel extended her stay. What was once a visit stretched into weekends, then weekdays, then mornings where she'd bring Ethan coffee at the shop and review expansion plans on a clipboard while he worked beneath a combine. They started hosting weekend workshops for local farmers, combining Ethan's mechanical skills with Isabel's knowledge of sustainable agriculture. Young people from nearby counties began showing up too, curious, eager, drawn by the promise of tradition and innovation living side by side. Arthur watched from the sidelines. He grew thinner, but his eyes grew brighter. He began writing again, filling notebooks with memories, lessons, and letters he never thought he'd send. One evening, he handed Ethan an envelope. For Isabel, after, Ethan didn't ask questions. He just tucked it safely away. The frost came early that year. Arthur passed peacefully in late November, in the old chair by the orchard, watching the leaves fall like golden confessions. Isabel found him with a soft smile still on his face, and one hand resting on the bark of the apple tree where her initials still lingered. At the funeral, Ethan spoke quietly. He wasn't perfect, but he tried to find his way back. And in doing so, he gave us ours. That night, Isabel opened the envelope. Inside was a photo of her as a child, planting the first sapling with her father's large hands wrapped around hers. And below it, in his handwriting, "Some things take years to grow. Forgive me for planting fear when I should planted faith. You found your soil now. Let love be the rain." Spring came with the softness of promise. The orchard, against all odds, began to bloom more fully than it had in years. Ethan and Isabel began building a new greenhouse beside it, one that would be part classroom, part community hub. On the day they broke ground, Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a ring, not new but restored. It had belonged to his mother. Isabel's eyes filled with tears before he could say a word. "Yeah," she whispered. He laughed. "I didn't even ask yet. You didn't have to." They married that summer beneath the walnut tree. Not grand, not formal, just laughter, vows, the scent of apples on the breeze, and the quiet knowledge that they'd come through the storm with roots stronger than ever. And as they danced their first dance under the fairy lights Ethan had strung with Amy and the local kids, he leaned in and whispered, "You came back." Isabel looked up at him, her eyes shimmering. "No," she said. "We found our way home." The golden light of dusk settled gently over Lancaster Fields, bathing the barley fields in a soft, honeyed hue. The low hum of machines blended with the calls of evening birds. But inside the greenhouse behind the research center, where technology and tradition converged, a different kind of sound filled the air. Laughter, spirited debates, and the occasional bubbling of coffee on a stovetop. Ethan sat on the porch step, an old ceramic mug cradled in his hands, his eyes locked on the scene ahead. Lila and Isabel were testing a new smart irrigation system, designed by Isabel and improved with a clever hydraulic tweak suggested by Lila. Watching the two of them, one grown, one young, work in such harmony tugged at something deep inside him. Not sadness, exactly. More like a fullness he couldn't quite name. He remembered the moment, just 3 weeks ago, when Lila asked, "Dad, if Miss Isabel used to be someone special to you, can she be someone special to me too?" No word in his emotional dictionary had been big enough for that moment. Lila had never asked much about her mother. Isabel, in turn, never probed the space that absence had left in Lila's life. They were like two young saplings finding each other in the same rich soil, needing no explanation, just sunlight and water to grow. One chilly October evening, with Nebraska's first cold breeze nipping at the windows, Lila quietly stepped into the small repair shop behind their house. Ethan was oiling a lawnmower engine under the soft yellow light that made the new lines at the corners of his eyes stand out. "Dad!" Lila's voice was barely louder than a whisper. "If Miss Isabel leaves again someday, would you let her go?" Ethan paused. He didn't look up right away. He remembered Isabel once saying, "My empire isn't these fields of tech. It's the belief that I can return and still be welcomed." "I wouldn't stop her," he said, voice a little rough. "But if I can help it, I'll give her a reason to stay." The next day, Isabel received a message while checking the drone diagnostics. "Are you free? I want to show you something." It was a notebook, leather-bound, a little worn at the edges. Inside, Lila had drawn a mock-up of a small learning center, right there at Lancaster Fields, where kids from town could learn mechanics, smart farming, and patience. "I think everyone deserves a second chance," Lila smiled. "Like you and Dad." Isabel felt her eyes sting. She sat beside Lila, gently placing her hand on the pages. "You know," she whispered, "I once thought I didn't deserve a second chance. But now, I hope I get the chance to call you family." 3 weeks later, Green Hearth opened its doors. There was no grand ribbon cutting, no fanfare, just a hand-painted wooden sign, 3 long benches, and a greenhouse converted from an old cattle barn. Local kids started coming by on weekends. Local kids. They learned how to handle wrenches, program soil sensors, and spot subtle plant changes. But what they learned most came from the quiet presence of a family slowly forming. One snowy night, as the first dustings of winter touched the window panes, Lila, pretending to be asleep, slipped downstairs to the workshop, where Ethan and Isabel were still talking over ginger tea. "Miss Isabel?" Lila's voice wavered. "Would you maybe stay for good?" Ethan turned. But Isabel was the one who answered, her voice thick with emotion and laughter. "If you'll have me," she whispered, "I want to be part of this place. Every day." Lila nodded, just once. She stepped forward, wrapped her arms around Isabel, then reached for Ethan and pulled the 3 of them together. "Then we're a trio," she said. "No need for mom or wife, just home." By the following spring, folks around town stopped calling Lancaster Fields a coal tech farm. They talked about how Lila taught elementary schoolers how to check oil levels, how Ethan ran free Fix-It Sundays for seniors, how Isabel, once nicknamed the Automation Queen, now hand-planted carrots because Lila said the ones planted by hand taste better. There were no declarations of love, no proposal, no wedding. But inside Green Hearth, hanging from a wooden frame, was a single photograph. Isabel, Ethan, and Lila, hand in hand, smiling against the backdrop of a sunlit greenhouse. The photo had been taken by a 9-year-old named Max, who wrote the caption himself. "A family doesn't need to share blood, just a heartbeat." And that was true. A family that had never had a name, at last, had found a way to call each other through love and the choice to stay. The sun filtered gently through the tall cottonwoods lining Lancaster Fields, casting long golden shadows across the workshop floor. Ethan Carter stood near the open barn door, sleeves rolled up, fingers smudged with grease. He wasn't looking at the tractor they were supposed to finish tuning that morning. He was watching Isabel across the field, her voice warm as she guided a group of interns through the layout of the new greenhouse. Her silhouette, graceful and strong, was outlined against the glass walls of the innovation hub she had built from dreams and determination. It had been 6 weeks since Isabel had come back into his life, and every day since, something inside Ethan had been slowly, carefully reawakening. Their reconnection had started with engines and spark plugs, yes, but it had grown into late-night discussions about soil health and old radio songs, early mornings with strong coffee, and unspoken memories. They never spoke directly about why they had let go of each other all those years ago. Maybe they didn't need to, because now Lilia, his brilliant 12-year-old daughter, laughed easily in Isabel's presence, bouncing between engineering blueprints and gardening projects like she had finally found a kindred spirit. And that, more than anything, made Ethan pay attention to the way his heart beat when Isabel was near. But happiness, he'd learned, always carried a kind of fragile weight, something you had to hold gently. That afternoon, Isabel stopped by the workshop, her cheeks flushed with wind and accomplishment. They approved it, she said, setting a folder on his workbench. The education board signed off on the community apprenticeship program. Lila gets to be the first junior ambassador. Ethan smiled, pride swelling in his chest. She's going to flip. She already knows, Isabel admitted, laughing. She read the email on my tablet while I was outside. Of course she did. There was an ease between them now, one that had taken time and quiet vulnerability to grow. They had found a rhythm. Two people long separated, now tentatively, sweetly learning to exist in the same space again. But not everyone was ready to accept it. Later that week, Ethan received a letter from the town zoning board. The expansion plan for his father's old workshop, now intended to be part of a hands-on mechanical learning center, was being delayed due to a formal complaint. At first, he assumed it was a bureaucratic error. Then he found out who filed it. Samuel Hastings, Isabel's former business partner and one-time fiancé. A man with sharp suits, sharper ambitions, and a bitterness that had aged poorly. He's saying there's a conflict of interest, Ethan said, voice tight as he laid the letter in front of Isabel. That Lancaster Fields is using personal relationships to influence zoning decisions for private gain. Isabel went pale. He never got over the board removing him. But I didn't think. It's not your fault, Ethan said gently. But it means this just got more complicated. And just like that, the old doubts crept in. That night, Lila found Ethan sitting on the porch, staring out across the fields. Dad, she said quietly, sitting beside him. Is something bad going to happen with Miss Isabel? Ethan exhaled slowly. Some people don't want to see us working together, or being together. Lila picked at a thread on her sleeve. Is it because she used to be with that other guy? Ethan blinked. You know about that? I read the article about Lancaster Fields from 5 years ago. I was curious. He couldn't help a small, surprised laugh. You really are your mother's daughter. Lila looked at him, eyes steady. Do you love her? The question hit him like a freight train. Simple, unflinching, and impossible to dodge. I don't know what to call it yet, Ethan said honestly. But it feels like something I lost a long time ago is finally starting to make sense again. Lila leaned her head on his shoulder. Then maybe it's worth fighting for. 2 days later, Ethan found Isabel standing alone in the greenhouse, staring out at a freshly plowed field. Her shoulders were squared, her jaw set with the kind of resolve that made him fall for her all over again. He's trying to get the board to freeze our funding, she said without turning around. Says I'm distracted, compromised. He's wrong. I know, Isabel whispered, but it still hurts. I spent years building this place. It was all I had after my parents passed. She finally turned to face him, eyes shining. And now I finally have you again. And Lila. And it's the one thing they'll use to try and tear it down. Ethan stepped closer, placing a hand gently over hers. Then let them try, he said. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air was thick with the unspoken weight of everything they had once lost, and everything they still hoped to build. I'm scared, Ethan, she admitted, voice trembling. Me too, he said. But being scared doesn't mean we stop. It just means we keep going, together. The town hearing was packed. Neighbors, farmers, students from the apprenticeship pilot program all showed up. Ethan was stunned by how many people stood to speak in their defense. Lila, wearing her junior ambassador badge and an oversized pair of work gloves, stepped up to the microphone with a quiet courage that stunned everyone. My dad and Miss Isabel taught me that building something real takes time and patience, and that sometimes machines, like people, Just need the right kind of care to run again." She paused, then added with a firm nod, "I think they're better together. Just like this town is better when we help each other grow." By the time she stepped down, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The complaint was dismissed. Weeks later, the first cohort of apprentices arrived. Some wide-eyed high schoolers, some older workers retraining after layoffs. Ethan taught mechanics in the mornings. Isabel handled sustainable systems in the afternoons. And Lila? She floated between the two, notebook in hand, occasionally correcting Ethan's wiring diagrams with quiet precision. One evening, as they locked up the workshop, Isabel handed Ethan a folded blueprint. He opened it to find a sketched-out plan, an addition to the workshop with a shared office, a lounge, and a small living space above. "What's this?" he asked, heart thudding. "I've been thinking," she said softly. "We've been working side by side, building something bigger than either of us imagined. Maybe it's time we lived that way too." Ethan didn't say anything. He simply pulled her into his arms and held her tightly. The dedication ceremony for the Lancaster Carter Innovation and Heritage Center drew visitors from neighboring counties. As the mayor cut the ribbon, Ethan stood beside Isabel and Lila, the three of them framed by the glowing warmth of sunset. Later that night, as they sat on the porch, now their porch, watching the stars blink to life over the fields, Isabel reached for Ethan's hand. "This place held us apart for so long," she murmured. "But now, it's holding us together." Ethan kissed her temple, his other hand resting over Lila's as she leaned against him, half asleep. And in that quiet moment, with the night air full of promise and the hum of dreams finally realized, they understood. Some love stories aren't about starting over. They're about picking up the pieces and building something stronger together. One bolt, one hope, one new beginning at a time. Autumn had settled over Lancaster fields with a kind of quiet majesty. The corn had been harvested, the air held a faint scent of wood smoke, and the hills burned orange with the last flame of maple leaves before winter would bleach the world in silence. But in one corner of this peaceful stretch of Nebraska, the Carter garage hummed with life, purpose, and something deeper, renewal. The dream had begun humbly, as all good dreams do. A workshop, a tractor, a past once shattered. But now, under the wooden sign that read Carter Lancaster Center for Agricultural Restoration and Innovation, a new kind of future was being forged, one where age didn't mean fading, where roots and circuits coexisted, and where love, though hard-earned, finally had a place to rest. Ethan Carter stood beside the newly painted barn doors, watching Lila, his 12-year-old daughter, lead a small group of students through the steps of restoring a 1958 Alice Chalmers harvester. Her boots were muddy, her braid had come loose, and her cheeks were flushed with the thrill of teaching something she truly loved. She reminded him of her mother in that way, before life had hardened her. But Lila also reminded him of Isabel. Isabel, who now walked beside him with a clipboard and a cup of cocoa, half grinning as she watched Lila explain combustion timing like a professor in overalls. "I swear she grew another inch since Tuesday," Ethan chuckled, taking the cup. "She's blooming. Finally feels like she belongs." "You both do," Isabel replied softly, her voice catching just a little in the back of her throat. And that was the heart of it. The center had launched with cautious excitement. Part mechanical apprenticeship, part agricultural tech incubator. It wasn't flashy. There were no big funders, no glossy flyers, just people who still believed in doing something with their hands, guided by those who had made a life out of broken bolts and hard choices. Some came to learn to weld. Others wanted to understand soil sensors or repair the machines I'd inherited but never mastered. Every so often, Someone came just to remember how it felt to be seen, useful, not left behind by time. Isabel's idea, bridging heritage and innovation, had found its place in the hearts of the people. Ethan's garage had become its soul. One cold November evening after the last group had gone, and Lila had fallen asleep on the couch with her nose in a circuit schematic, Ethan sat beside Isabel by the fire. She had her feet curled beneath her and a folder in her lap. "What's that?" he asked, gesturing to the thick manila envelope. She hesitated. "A proposal from the university. They want to officially partner with us. Make the center part of a regional training initiative." Ethan's brow rose. "That's big, it is." She flipped through the papers. "It means more funding, more students, maybe even satellite centers." He waited, sensing the but in her pause. "But it also means they want me to oversee all of it. Not just here, across the Midwest. Offices in Chicago, Minneapolis, a few months a year traveling. It's what I always thought I wanted." The fire crackled, throwing warm light across her face. She didn't look triumphant. She looked torn. "What about what you want now?" he asked quietly. Isabel looked at him, her eyes full of something deeper than conflict. "I used to think dreams had to be chased, but this one, it came back to find me. You, Lila. This garage." Ethan reached for her hand. "Then maybe it's not about choosing between dreams. Maybe it's about choosing how to live inside them." She exhaled. "I'm afraid if I walk away from that offer, I'll regret it one day." "And if you take it?" he asked gently. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. 2 weeks later, the decision was made. Isabel turned down the university's top position, but accepted a part-time mentorship role, working remotely and bringing students to the center instead of the other way around. She chose presence over prestige, and no one applauded louder than Lila. At the winter open house, Lila stood up during the community dinner, holding a hand-painted plaque she had made with Ethan's wood-burning tool. It read, "For the woman who taught me how to grow ideas. For the man who taught me how to fix them. For the place that gave us back our dreams." Isabel's eyes welled up before the second sentence. Ethan had to turn away and pretend something was in his eye. Even the mayor clapped with a tissue in his hand. That winter brought storms. One night, after the snow had fallen for hours and the power flickered out, they gathered in the garage's back room, now their living space, lined with old books, blueprints, and coffee mugs. Lila curled up under a quilt beside the wood stove, and Isabel sat on the floor with Ethan, wrapped in his father's old work jacket. "I never told you something," Isabel said, her voice low over the hum of the fire. "What's that?" "The week before I left for Stanford, I drove past this garage every day. I parked down the road and watched you work." Ethan blinked. "I was afraid," she whispered. "Afraid if I walked in, I wouldn't leave again. And back then I thought leaving meant winning." "And now?" he asked, heart thudding. She looked at him, a long look full of history, ache, and healing. "Now I know leaving doesn't always mean strength. Sometimes staying, loving through the mess, that's the real courage." Ethan didn't speak. He just kissed her, long and slow and true. Spring came slowly, tender and green. They installed a greenhouse behind the garage, where Lila's science club tested vertical farming prototypes. A local veteran started volunteering in the machine shop, quietly teaching younger students welding techniques. Isabel began hosting a monthly speaker series called Farms and Futures, and Ethan was invited to speak at the Regional Mechanics Summit. But most of all, life returned. Not just work, not just purpose, laughter in the mornings. Sunday dinners with casserole dishes passed down from Isabel's mother. Long walks after rain, when the fields steamed and smelled of fresh beginnings. One Sunday, Lila stood in the doorway with a wrench in one hand and a bouquet of wildflowers in the other. Isabel, she said, grinning. Dad's pretending he doesn't need help lifting the gearbox again. You'd better come rescue it. Isabel smiled, set down her notebook and followed. As she stepped into the light, into the dust and laughter and shared chaos of a place that once held only ghosts and regrets, she knew. The dream she had once sacrificed had never died. It had waited, quietly, patiently, until it was ready to be written again, with grease-stained fingers, wide-eyed wonder, and love that no longer needed to hide in the shadows of the past. This was the story they would keep writing. Together, the spring breeze swept through Lancaster fields, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and sprouting wheat. Ethan Carter tightened the last bolt on the old tractor, while beside him, Lila, her hair tied up high and speckled with dust, carefully noted each repair step in her workbook with impressive precision. From across the field, Isabel approached, dressed in a crisp white shirt. A few strands of hair slipped from her elegant bun, caught in the wind. Her smile was gentle, but her eyes held a quiet worry. In her hand was the morning newspaper, its bold headline impossible to miss. CEO of Lancaster Fields, romantically linked to small-town mechanic. Conflict of interest or PR stunt? Isabel handed the paper to Ethan. He barely glanced at it before folding it up and setting it down on the side of the machine. I don't care about that noise, he said, voice steady. But the board does, Isabel replied, her voice soft but firm. They called an emergency meeting this afternoon. They're worried about the company's image, and they've proposed suspending our partnership with Carter Garage. Lila looked up, her bright eyes narrowing. Just because you and Dad. I mean, because you two are together. Isabel gently brushed a lock of hair from Lila's face, her smile sad. Sometimes grown-ups forget what really matters. That afternoon, in the glass-walled boardroom of Lancaster Fields, sunlight spilled across the long oak table. Isabel sat at the head, facing familiar faces, some who had built the company with her from the ground up, others more recent, drawn by Lancaster's national rise. The board isn't just concerned about the media, said Mr. Brooks. Legal counsel. It's about the procurement process. Awarding Carter Garage the training contract may be viewed as preferential treatment. So none of you see the quality? Isabel countered. You don't see that Ethan is the only person within 100 miles who understands both vintage mechanics and modern sensor calibration. That our training program is giving dozens of rural kids a future. No one's questioning his ability, another board member said. But with the press raising doubts, we need a clear, objective response. That evening, Isabel came to the shop. Ethan was teaching Lila how to fine-tune a moisture sensor on a seed drill. When she entered, father and daughter looked up. Silence fell, broken only by the hum of the machine slowly winding down. We have to stop, Isabel said softly, standing just a few steps away. What about the training program? Ethan asked, not taking his eyes off her. They want me to replace you with a neutral vendor, some corporation that's never touched dirt. Her voice wavered. And if I refuse, they're threatening to vote on revoking my leadership. Ethan nodded slowly. I understand. She stepped closer, placing her hand on the old workbench that had once belonged to Ethan's father. But this doesn't mean I'm choosing them over you. It just means you're trying to protect what you've built, just like I stayed for Lila instead of chasing far-off dreams. They stood in quiet understanding, like two rivers branching away, yet still heading toward the same ocean. In the following weeks, Isabel stepped back from her position, temporarily handing over operations to the vice president. The contract with Carter Garage was suspended, but the shop remained open. Ethan continued teaching former students, many of whom stayed on, despite the funding freeze. Lila, just 12, came to the garage every afternoon. She redrew schematics, proposed design improvements, and even wrote an open letter to the very newspaper that had started the scandal. The letter was published with the headline, "From a 12-year-old girl. What adults forgot about values." The impact was far beyond what anyone expected. Local farmers, teachers, and former students flooded news outlets with letters of support. Several educational foundations reached out to partner with Carter Garage. A non-profit promoting traditional agricultural skills invited Ethan to join as an advisor. Then, a week later, Midwest Tribune ran a new story, Lancaster Fields from Scandal to Turning Point, when values outlast headlines. In a live interview, Isabel said, "I didn't choose Ethan because of personal reasons. I chose him because he's the only one who truly understands that innovation doesn't mean abandoning roots. And if that's considered a conflict of interest, I welcome the conversation." The board couldn't ignore the public. One by one, perspectives shifted, not because of the press, but because the truth had revealed itself. An emergency meeting was called. Isabel was reinstated with full executive powers. Carter Garage's contract was not only renewed but expanded, with 2 satellite centers proposed in neighboring counties. On a bright summer morning at the new training pavilion nestled between the heritage fields of Lancaster, Ethan stood beside Isabel and Lila beneath a large banner that read, "Unified AgTech Training Center, where tradition meets innovation." They didn't need to say a word. Their presence together was the loudest statement of all. The crowd applauded. Lila clutched Ethan's hand and turned to Isabel. "Can I put you down as my stepmom on the new school form?" she asked quietly, her cheeks flushed pink. Isabel crouched down, touched. "Only if you really want to." "I do. Because now we're a team. Not just in the field, but in life." Ethan rested his hand on his daughter's shoulder. "And this time, we're not letting anyone break us apart." As the sun rose higher, glinting off solar panels and modern harvesters in the distance, Ethan, Isabel, and Lila stood there, not just as a family, but as the living proof of a world where love, purpose, and understanding could bridge any divide. They were no longer just fixing what was broken. They were building something new, something lasting, something whole. The old oak tree in front of Carter Garage stood resilient through the early autumn wind, its amber leaves spiraling gently onto the gravel path below. Inside, Ethan Carter sat at his father's worn workbench, hands still, gaze fixed on a photo of the garage taken in the 1970s, back when his father first opened it with nothing but a wrench, a dream, and a stubborn refusal to quit. Across from him lay the proposal from Lancaster Field's executive board, a full acquisition of Carter Garage, framed as a strategic integration into the company's growing heritage technology initiative. On the surface, it promised funding, expanded reach, and prestige. But to Ethan, it felt like a death sentence in a suit. The door creaked open. Isabel stepped in, her expression soft, but the tension in her shoulders unmistakable. She carried 2 cups of coffee, one with a splash of cream, the other black. She knew his routine by now, just as he knew she hummed when nervous, which she was doing now, faintly, like a distant melody. "They're pressing hard," she said, setting the cup beside him. "Another vote is scheduled for next week. They want an answer." Ethan didn't respond right away. He took a long sip of the bitter brew and finally looked at her. "And what do you want, Isabel?" She hesitated. It wasn't the first time he'd asked, but it was the first time he asked without fear, without trying to shelter her from the weight of her own world. Wasn't about business. It was about that. "I want to protect what we're building here," she said quietly, her hand resting on the plans they'd drawn up for the training center. "But they see you as a symbol, An unpredictable variable they can't control. Ethan nodded. That's because I am. His voice was calm, resolute. They want the building, the name, the image, but they don't want the spirit of it. They don't understand why Lila spends her weekends rebuilding carburetors instead of coding drones. Isabel sat beside him, her fingers brushing his. They think I'm letting sentimentality cloud my judgment. That loving you, he turned toward her, stopping her with a look that held both strength and sorrow. Is love a liability now, Isabel? No, she said firmly. But it makes you a target. The words settled like dust in the quiet room. Later that night, Ethan stood by the garage window, watching Lila in the driveway. She was crouched by her bike, her hands black with grease, her brow furrowed in concentration. Isabel joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. She's building something, Ethan murmured. Not just machines. Identity. Identity. Isabel rested her head against his arm. And they want to claim it all. Package it, sell the story. But the story's not for sale, Ethan replied, his voice low but resolute. The week that followed was a blur of legal meetings, veiled threats and mounting pressure. Isabel was summoned to a closed-door session with the board, where phrases like shareholder confidence, reputational risk, and conflict of interest were hurled with increasing hostility. Back at the garage, Ethan worked in silence. Customers still came. Neighbors, farmers, old friends, people who didn't care about headlines or company strategy. They came because they trusted him, because he listened when their machines sputtered, because he remembered their names, because he showed up when no one else would. On Thursday evening, Lila brought home a school project. She had to present on personal heroes. I chose Grandpa Carter, she said simply, placing a photo of Ethan's father on the table. He taught Dad how to fix things, and Dad taught me. Ethan felt something shift deep within. Legacy wasn't about ownership. It was about continuity. The final confrontation came the day before the vote. Isabel walked into the executive boardroom wearing no makeup, no tailored suit. Just jeans, boots, and on the same work shirt she wore the day she helped Ethan fix that rusted tractor. Her voice didn't rise, but every word hit like a hammer. You claim to stand for innovation and heritage, but heritage isn't a brand. It's a responsibility. Ethan Carter isn't a mascot to parade in your annual report. He's the soul of this partnership. And if you make me choose between keeping my seat at this table and standing beside him, I will not choose this table. A stunned silence followed. Then the chairman spoke, his tone clipped. That would be considered a resignation. Then it's a privilege, Isabel said, and walked out. She drove straight to Carter Garage. Ethan was working on the Ferguson 35, the same tractor that brought them back into each other's lives. She didn't say a word at first, just stood there, breathing in the scent of oil, dust, and history. They made me choose, she said finally. He turned, and I chose us. I chose this. I chose the girl in the driveway who believes the world can be fixed with the right wrench and a bit of heart. Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. I was scared you'd give it all up for me. I didn't give anything up, she whispered into his shoulder. I just remembered what matters. The following month, Lancaster Fields announced a new direction. Under new leadership, Isabel, now free from corporate obligations, threw herself fully into the training center project. Carter Garage was never sold. Instead, it expanded. With community support and a quiet partnership with a regional agricultural co-op, they built out the North Wing. It became the Carter Lancaster Center for Agricultural Innovation, where vintage machines met modern methods, and where every student, young or old, learned not just to repair equipment, but to understand the heart behind every bolt and bearing. Leela gave a speech at the grand opening, her voice shaking but proud. My parents taught me that fixing something isn't about making it new. It's about making it work again. Stronger, better. And I think that's what they've done too. The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was warm, steady, honest. That night, after the crowds had gone and the lights dimmed, Ethan sat beside Isabel on the bench behind the workshop. The stars above blinked gently, as if nodding approval. You ever think, Ethan asked, how different life would have been if we made different choices back then? All the time, Isabel replied, her fingers laced through his. Any regrets? She smiled. Only that it took us this long to come home? He chuckled softly, brushing a strand of silver hair from her cheek. Well, he said, some things just need time. Like a good engine or a stubborn heart. She leaned her head on his shoulder. And when they finally start, they don't quit. They sat in the silence of two souls reunited, not by force, not by fate, but by choice, by courage, by the belief that love, like legacy, can be rebuilt, not as it once was, but as it was always meant to be. And somewhere beyond the trees, a tractor purred to life, an old machine reborn for a new purpose. Just like them, spring came early to the town of Ashmore, bringing warm breezes and the soft green of new growth across the fields surrounding Lancaster Fields. But inside Carter Garage, where the scent of old grease mixed with the quiet click of wrenches, something far greater was taking shape. Ethan Carter stood in front of a newly pinned blueprint on the wall, his hands still smudged with oil, eyes locked on lines he hadn't drawn. The sketches were sharp, precise, the work of Sofia Delgado, a young engineer from the Delgado family, now a strategic partner with Carter Garage. The Delgados were a respected local family, known for 3 generations of mechanics, and for turning rookies into skilled tradespeople. This partnership wasn't born of convenience. It was the result of long nights, hard conversations, tears, and a shared realization. Isabel Lancaster, CEO of Lancaster Fields, had stood before her board of directors with both vulnerability and resolve. I'm not walking away from Ethan, she said, and I won't sacrifice what we've built. We don't have to choose between innovation and tradition. We can bring them together. And so, the third way was born. On the day of the official opening of the new training center, the Carter Delgado Learning Wing, sunlight filtered through skylights, casting warm gold across new benches and shiny tools. For the first time in his life, Ethan wore a clean white shirt under his old leather jacket, one Lila had insisted he keep. Because it's so you, Dad. Layla, now junior apprentice supervisor, led a group of eager students, most of them holding tools for the very first time. Don't be afraid of the grease, Lila called out with confidence. It's the smell of creation and opportunity. From the doorway, Ethan's chest tightened with pride. That was his daughter, bold, capable, and above all, happy. Across the room, Isabel spoke with Mr. Gabriel Delgado, patriarch of the Delgado family. Their conversation had shifted from guarded pleasantries to the easy tone of trusted collaborators. Isabel met Ethan's gaze and walked toward him, her eyes glowing. We did it, she whispered. Not just did it, Ethan replied. We did it right. But peace never stays long when the stakes are this high. Just weeks after the grand opening, An article went viral on a prominent agriculture blog, questioning the integrity of the Carter-Delgado partnership. The writer suggested it was a clever political move to cover internal conflicts of interest. Ethan, furious, nearly shattered his phone. "I didn't sign anything to cover anything up," he snapped during an emergency meeting with Isabel and Gabriel. Gabriel, nearly 20 years Ethan's senior, nodded calmly. "I understand. I was young once too, and then I learned anything built on trust doesn't fear the wind. We won't react. We'll respond." And respond they did. They opened the center's doors to the press, local families, even the skeptics who had once whispered behind closed doors. Those people watched Ethan teach a student how to disassemble a carburetor, saw Isabel explain soil sensors with passion, and witnessed Lila hand a new pair of gloves to an orphan boy who dreamed of becoming a mechanic. The narrative didn't change because of poor. It changed because of truth. One late spring afternoon, sunlight streamed through the trees behind Carter Garage. Ethan sat on the back porch, Isabel handing him a cold glass of sweet tea. "Do you ever think we waited too long?" she asked softly. Ethan looked at her, his voice steady. "No, you left to grow. I stayed to keep the roots alive. And now we're picking up where we left off." Isabel smiled and leaned against him. "I never thought I could love a child who wasn't my own this deeply." "She thought of me," Ethan whispered. "And now she's a part of you too." Silence fell between them. Not empty, but full of everything that didn't need to be said. That evening, the three of them, Ethan, Isabel, and Lila, sat around their cozy kitchen table. Isabel tried her hand at lasagna based on Lila's mom's recipe, but with a twist of goat cheese, which made Lila wrinkle her nose. "Dad doesn't like goat cheese." "Your dad will eat it," Ethan teased, "if you'll help me set the oven to the right temperature." Laughter rang through the room. Among stacks of blueprints and planning folders sat a drawing by Lila, a building that blended old brick workshop architecture with modern glass panels. On the rooftop was a wooden sign carved with the words, "Carter Delgado Training Center, where old hands meet new futures." Ethan picked up the drawing and placed it in an old wooden frame his father once used for shop certifications. "This is the real legacy," he said, voice thick with emotion. Isabel reached for his hand, her eyes soft with love. And Lila, the girl who used to scribble engine diagrams next to her math homework, looked at them not with the eyes of a child but of someone who knew. These two had chosen each other after all this time, with a kind of love no longer shadowed by fear. As night fell, the lights of Carter Garage glowed warm and steady, now a new symbol of Ashmore, not just a place to fix machines, but a place to mend hearts, revive dreams, and prove that between innovation and tradition, between past and future, there's always a bridge, if you're brave enough to build it together. The first morning at Carter and Lancaster Agricultural Services arrived with a crisp wind sweeping through the Nebraska plains and the scent of damp earth clinging to the sunrise. The newly painted sign stood tall above the gravel drive, its lettering clean and proud, where tradition met innovation. Ethan Carter stood by the front porch of the newly expanded training center, brushing non-existent dust from his work shirt. The original Carter Garage, with its oil-stained floor and shelves of tools passed down for generations, now opened into a bright new wing lined with diagnostic tablets, hydroponic prototypes, and solar-integrated agri-mechanical modules. And somewhere between the wrench racks and the touchscreen panels, the world he and Isabel had dreamed of was becoming real. Inside, Isabel Lancaster moved with a grace honed by years in the corporate world, yet softened now by something warmer, more human. She wore jeans and boots, her boardroom heels retired, and greeted every student by name as they trickled in for the center's first workshop. And among them, with a clipboard and a proud little smile that mirrored her father's, stood Lila Carter, 12 years old, her ponytail bouncing with the same energy that had once driven her to rebuild an engine out of scrap parts for the county fair. She wasn't just a student anymore. She was a junior instructor. The inaugural class was a mix of the curious and the committed. Teenagers from nearby towns, mid-career farmers wanting to bridge the gap, and even a couple of retired veterans who'd once fixed tractors by touch and now wanted to understand drones and data systems. Lila's section, how to read a machine's language, wasn't scheduled until 11, but she was already buzzing around, helping one elderly farmer sync a soil monitor to his tablet. Ethan watched her from a distance, a hand resting absently on a rusty crescent wrench that had belonged to his father. His throat tightened, not from nostalgia, but from pride. Oh, his little girl, his wide-eyed miracle who once begged to tighten bolts in the garage while he worked, now had students of her own. "I never imagined we'd get here," he murmured. Isabel appeared beside him, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I did," she said, smiling gently, "because you never stopped believing. Not in this place, not in her." They stood together, side by side, in the heart of something they'd built not just from vision, but from years of regret, healing, and courage. At noon, they hosted a small ceremony in the courtyard, a ribbon cutting without the fuss. No cameras, just friends, family, a few townsfolk who'd been skeptical at first but now stood nodding with quiet approval. Isabel addressed the group first. "This isn't just a facility, it's a promise," she said, voice clear and strong. "That we can honor the past without being chained to it. That we can build futures that include everyone, especially the ones the world often overlooks." Public speaking wasn't his strength. He'd rather repair a busted crankshaft blindfolded than stand in front of a crowd. But with Isabel behind him and Lila beaming from the front row, his voice steadied. "My dad taught me to listen to machines," he began. "But he also taught me to listen to people, especially when they were quietest, when they felt forgotten. This place is for them. For the ones who think they're too old to learn again. For the kids who feel out of place in a classroom but come alive holding a wrench." He paused. "And for those of us who once let love slip away because we were scared, and then got lucky enough to get a second chance." The crowd didn't clap so much as hum with warmth. Eyes misted, heads nodded, and Lila, with her clipboard hugged to her chest, mouthed the words, "You did good, Dad." Later that week, Ethan found himself alone in the original garage, watching sunlight stripe across the floorboards, head polished by hand. A photo had been nailed near the front desk, a candid shot taken that morning, him, Isabel, and Lila beneath the new sign, arms around each other. He hadn't realized how much the building had changed until that moment. It still smelled like oil and old wood, but now it echoed with laughter and learning. Lila's sketches, wiring diagrams, and futuristic plow concepts covered a whiteboard near the front. Isabel's digital farm maps were neatly archived in a corner file system, and above the entrance where his dad's calendar used to hang was a simple plaque that read, "Legacy is not what we leave behind. It's what we build with the ones who walk beside us." One quiet evening, as the wind whistled through the fields and the last light faded, Ethan and Isabel sat on the back porch sipping hot cocoa. Lila was inside working on a presentation for a student showcase, humming a tune they couldn't quite recognize. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come back?" Ethan asked. Isabel's gaze lingered on the field lights. "Every day," she whispered. "But I think even if I hadn't, life would have found a way to bring us back together." "You can't outrun unfinished stories," Ethan chuckled, nudging her shoulder gently. You're still better with words than I am, and you still fix things better than anyone I know." Silence fell again, not uncomfortable, just full. The kind of silence that speaks of roots finally planted, wounds finally healed. "Do you think she's happy?" Isabel asked suddenly, nodding toward the glowing windows where Lila worked. Ethan followed her gaze, his heart swelling. "I think she's exactly where she's supposed to be." The grand finale of the semester came with the student showcase. Parents, farmers, and local business owners packed into the main hall as each participant demonstrated what they'd learned. When it was Lila's turn, she stood a little straighter. "My name is Lila Carter," she said confidently. "And today I'm going to show you how a simple irrigation sensor can save thousands of gallons of water, if you know how to install it right." She paused, then grinned. "And maybe also how to fix it when it shorts out during a thunderstorm." The crowd laughed. Her demo was flawless. Ethan didn't cry, but only because Isabel squeezed his hand the entire time. That night, as they locked up the center, a gentle snow began to fall, coating the fields and roof in soft silence. Ethan looked up, watching the flakes settle. "You know," he said, "for a guy who thought his life was just going to be bolts and engines, this has turned out to be something else." Isabel leaned into his side, her voice quiet and sure. "It's turned into home." And beside them, Lila added with a sleepy smile, "It's just the beginning." And it was. The beginning of something built not just to last, but to carry on. The first frost arrived quietly, like a secret whispered across the fields. Ethan Carter stood by the window of the apartment above the training center, coffee in hand, watching as the frost silvered the bare branches of the old cottonwood. Below, the roofs of both the original Carter garage and the sleek new Lancaster expansion shimmered faintly under the thin glaze of winter. Behind him, Isabel Lancaster moved gently through the morning silence, barefoot on the worn hardwood floors, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders as she joined him at the window. "First freeze," she murmured, her voice still thick with sleep. He nodded, sipping his coffee. "Winter's early." Isabel smiled faintly. "Or maybe we've just been too caught up in the warmth to notice the shift." They stood together in that hush, letting the morning unfold between them. Outside, the world was changing, but inside, for the first time in a long time, everything felt still. After the whirlwind of the launch, of ribbon cuttings and newspaper features and training sessions that turned into something akin to family reunions, the stillness of late autumn was a blessing. The center had found its rhythm. Students came and went. Farmers returned for second modules. The local paper even started running a monthly tools and tech column written by none other than Lila Carter, age 12 and already more articulate than most adults. She had grown taller, more confident, but she still insisted on sitting cross-legged on the workbench when doing homework, still preferred her hands covered in grease to typing on a screen. And more than once, Ethan had caught her glancing between him and Isabel with a hopeful light in her eyes. One Saturday morning, after a night of cold rain, the three of them gathered in the workshop's community lounge, each nursing a mug of cocoa. Lila, tapping her pencil against her knee, looked up from a sketch. Lila smirked, then added more seriously, "Is this permanent? Us? This? Everything?" The room went very still. Isabel set down her cup slowly. "Do you want it to be?" "I've wanted it to be since the day she made you pancakes, Dad." Lila's voice was quiet now, since before I even knew what it meant. Ethan's throat tightened. He looked at the woman beside him, the one who'd left once and returned not just to stay but to build, and then at the daughter who had carried more hope and heart than most grown-ups he knew. "I think it's time we made it official," he said softly. They didn't announce it, not at first. There were no big declarations, no dramatic proposals, just a quiet understanding sealed by Sunday mornings spent baking together, by late nights talking over farm tech prototypes, by Lila placing a single sticky note on the fridge that read, "Family of 3. Adjust grocery list accordingly." The wedding, when it came, was held at the Heritage Barn. It was Isabel's idea, to honor not just their story, but the legacy of both families. The beams were still marked with her father's initials, and now a newly sanded patch bore the carved letters E-I-L. Guests were few, just close friends, a handful of longtime supporters, and the Delgado family, who had become more like kin than business partners. Jenny Delgado even officiated, her speech equal parts humor and history. Lila stood between them during the vows, holding their hands. "I've got enough rings to fix an entire irrigation system," she said, slipping a handmade copper band onto each of their fingers. "But these are the only ones that matter." They laughed. They cried. And when Isabel kissed Ethan beneath the soft strings of barn lights, the applause that rose from the gathered crowd wasn't loud. It was steady, like the rhythm of a well-oiled engine, or a heart finding its beat again. Winter settled in with a hush, but it wasn't quiet in the way grief is. It was quiet in the way peace is. Ethan taught Lila how to split logs for the new fireplace Isabel insisted on installing in the apartment. Isabel showed them both how to bake sourdough. Lila launched a community project with other students to design a solar-powered chicken coop for retired farmers. Every Sunday they made waffles and built dreams. Some nights, Ethan and Isabel would sit by the fire, her head on his shoulder, while Lila lay on the floor with blueprints scattered around her like snowflakes. "This wasn't the life I imagined," Isabel said once, her fingers tracing the lines of Ethan's wrist. "But it's the one I never dared to dream." Ethan looked down at her, brushing a strand of silver from her temple. "Some dreams don't begin until we've made peace with the ones we let go." Spring came, and with it, new challenges. A late frost damaged several training plots. A drone prototype malfunctioned mid-demo. A visiting investor questioned the center's long-term scalability. But through it all, they weathered the storms like they always had, together. Layla presented the investor with a hand-drawn growth model on a piece of cardboard and walked away with his card and an offer to sponsor a youth scholarship. By summer, the center had doubled enrollment. The Carter-Lancaster family garden, planted in memory of Ethan's parents, began to bloom. Lila added a wooden sign near the tomatoes, "Rooted in love, growing in legacy." And on warm evenings, the 3 of them would lie beneath the stars, fingers brushing, laughter mingling, hearts whole. They were not the same people they'd been before that first reconnection. The cracks had not disappeared, but had been mended, filled with gold like kintsugi, made more beautiful for the breaks that once threatened to undo them. And as they stood one evening in the middle of the workshop, watching a new class begin orientation, Ethan whispered to Isabel, "Do you ever miss the old quiet?" She shook her head, her hand resting gently on his chest. "I don't miss anything that kept me from hearing this." From outside, Lila's voice echoed bright and sure. "Welcome to Carter and Lancaster. You're not just here to learn machines. You're here to learn each other." And so the story went on, no longer about fixing what was broken, but about building something new, whole, and wondrous from everything they had been, and everything they still could be. The past had taught them. The present had healed them. And the future? The future was theirs. One lesson, one laugh, one sunrise at a time. Sometimes life doesn't fall apart with a bang. It just drifts off course. A job that consumes too much time, a relationship that quietly fades, dreams shelved in favor of responsibilities. Reading Ethan and Isabel's story hit close to home, not because I've rebuilt an agricultural center or found a long-lost love, but because, like them, I've learned how easy it is to lose touch with what truly matters in the quiet hum of daily survival. I've spent years chasing success in ways that left parts of myself behind. I built routines, hit milestones, even earned recognition. But somewhere along the way, I stopped asking the harder questions. What legacy am I really leaving? Am I investing in connections that last or just checking boxes? Ethan's decision to hold on to Carter Garage despite outside pressures felt deeply personal. It reminded me of the value in preserving something not because it's easy or profitable, but because it's meaningful. There's a part of the story where Isabel looks around at the life she's built, powerful, polished, widely respected, and realizes that something vital is missing. That hit me in the chest. I've had moments like that, sitting in my car after a long day, wondering if the version of myself I'm projecting is the same as the one I quietly long to be. Ethan and Isabel teach us that success is hollow if it's not shared, if it isn't rooted in love, in legacy, in giving back. And then there's Lila, wise beyond her years, endlessly curious, and a symbol of what the next generation can become if we're brave enough to show them more than just how to succeed, but how to live. I see a bit of her in my younger self, eager to learn, soaking up everything, hungry for connection. Somewhere along the way, I think we all need someone like Lila to remind us that building a life is as much about passing on heart as it is about handing down knowledge. The biggest lesson I took from this story is simple but not easy. Rebuilding isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about being willing to build something new from the pieces you've saved. That means letting go of what no longer serves you. That means facing the hard conversations, like Ethan and Isabel did. Not just about love, but about identity, purpose, and partnership. So today I ask myself, what's my version of Carter Garage? What space in my life needs protecting, rebuilding, or reimagining? What parts of my past still carry value waiting to be honored, not erased? Maybe I don't need a gala or a ribbon cutting. Maybe all I need is the courage to choose stillness, to gather the tools I already have, to listen, really listen, to the ones who matter, and to believe that it's never too late to shape something beautiful, meaningful, and enduring from the life I already live. Because the most powerful stories don't just stay on the page, they become a mirror. And this one reminded me who I still have time to become. Before we go, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Are you tuning in from the heartland of America? A quiet countryside, or maybe a bustling city, dreaming of open fields? Drop a comment below. Story touched your heart, inspired you, or simply gave you a moment of warmth in your day. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another uplifting story like this. Thank you so much for being here. Your support means everything. And I can't wait to bring you more heartfelt stories soon. Until next time, stay kind, stay inspired, and I'll see you in the next one.